beyond the, that's okay. So, again, such a pleasure to welcome Dana, who is one of our own, a wonderful author, retired FBI agent, and author of 3 FBI undercover novels. Tonight's novel, Beyond the Cabin, when in our last meeting we talked about this, and what really sparked our attention to this one is because it takes place in the Low Country. Dana changed her major to police administration. She has a Bachelor of Science, earned her Juris Doctor in 1992 from Chase College of Law. She had a lot of different jobs, and she says one of her favorite jobs was first mate on a tour boat. She was assigned to 4 different FBI field divisions, had the opportunity to work a wide variety of cases, multifaceted narcotics investigations, domestic sex trafficking of minors, and violent crime. And as you read the books, now that we know Dana and you're reading the book, are you not picturing Dana in the books, right? She had the pleasure of being on the FBI's evidence response team for the 9/11 World Trade Center attack. And she also attended and passed the FBI's prestigious undercover school. Very generous with her time and talent, and we really appreciate this. And so one of the other things too, visit Dana's website. It's really amazing. There's 5 pages of different interviews and different podcasts and everything. And the other thing is Dana has won a number of awards. The Feathered Quill, Gold for Best Adult Fiction, Royal Palm Literary for Best Thriller, Southeastern Writers Award for Excellence. She's also, not only does she do FBI stories, but a lot of other things. And so she's also won Inspirational Writing and Holiday Seasonal Writing from Southeastern Writers. Next Generation Indie Awards, first place for Action Adventure, Royal Dragonfly Book Award, and the Kirkus Best Indie Books. So as I read some of the podcasts and some of the interviews, I have to say one of my favorites, and this is how we're going to start Dana off tonight. I didn't tell her this in advance, but I've seen Dana present. I've had the pleasure of working with Dana through Osher Lifelong Learning and on history and Conroy tours. And one of the questions was, can't you just relax and do nothing? Right? She's laughing. And she says, the FBI is hardly ever portrayed factually in novels, television, or movies. And she said the first about writing allowed her to not only a thriller element, but delve into the psychological impact that undercover work has on an agent. And then so related to the book that we read for tonight, she said, after college, I worked on tour boat for a captain who was also a remarkable storyteller. The captain weaved his tales of history, mystery, and romance to the delight of his passengers of all ages. I envied his flawless technique and wanted to entertain people as he did. Now with my stories, I'm able to make this dream a reality. So with that, I welcome Dana.
Thank you, Janet. After listening to Janet, it makes me think I probably entered way too many contests.
Never.
So I guess tonight I'll just start out talking about Beyond the Cabin, and then I'm always open for any kind of questions and things like that. I'll tell you a little bit about the book and why I wrote the book. Beyond the Cabin is the second of the series. The first book I wrote was Behind the Mask, and that one was based on my very first undercover experience as an undercover agent in the FBI. And I did a long-term deep cover case where I worked with the extremists in California. So that was the birth of the first book. When that book was done, I wanted to write a love story to the Low Country. I love the Low Country. This is home. And from working for Captain Sandy, I developed just this deep passion for this area. And I just had to write a book that was set in the Low Country. Well, the beauty about having an FBI undercover agent is the undercover agent never works in their own backyard. So you're always moved around. So the first case was in California. Why not stick Lexie in the Low Country of South Carolina? So that's what I did. Well, Lexie, of course, has a specialty, and that's the extremist. So I thought, well, you know, South Carolina, there's not a lot of extremist activity. So how am I going to get this extremist agent in South Carolina? So that's kind of where the red herring with the environmental stuff came in. And if you haven't read the book, hopefully I just didn't give away something, but anyway, so Lexie gets down here and she's working in South Carolina and she meets Captain Meade. So of course, Captain Meade is my dear friend, Captain Sandy, and that was my boss who I worked for. I started working for Captain Sandy, I guess, when I was a teenager. I mean, I was young, I was 18, 19, 20 years old, and I started working on this tour boat as the first mate. And I followed him around like a puppy. I thought he was the greatest thing I'd ever met in my life. You know, he was a fantastic storyteller. Whether he told the truth or he's lying, who knows, but you know, he was just a great storyteller. So that's where I developed the love from the Low Country from. So I had to put him in the book. So I developed the character of Captain Meade. And I went to Captain Sandy and I said, you know, you're in this book. I said, but do you want me to change the name? He said, yeah, call me something else. And so there was an old captain at the time in Merle's Inlet area named Captain Meade. And so I loved the name. And I said, well, we'll go with Captain Meade and kind of carry on the whole storytelling from that standpoint as well. So Captain Meade was Captain Sandy, and he was Captain Sandy from the start to the finish. And I love the character. He was probably my favorite character from all three of the novels. And then I found out Captain Sandy Vermont, who had worked for, had cancer, and he was going into hospice and didn't have long to live. So I took the dedication to him and I said, Captain, I'm dedicating this book to you. And he read the dedication and he actually helped me with some of the parts of the book. If it has an alligator in it or something really weird, Captain Sandy probably helped me with those parts. He read the dedication. He knew the book was coming out. He never did get to finish the book. He died before the book came out. But I like to think that Captain Sandy's a little bit of him is always going to be with me because of the book. And I'm not saying that there won't be another Captain Meade book. I think there's plenty of material out there that maybe one day Captain Meade may come back. Maybe he might have his own story to tell. Or maybe Lexie get tired of the FBI and ended up back in the Low Country, who knows?
Fishing.
Fishing, there we go, there we go. So then everybody always says, well, how did this happen? I said, well, the first book was a standalone and I never planned on writing the series. But then after the second book, I was addicted to writing and there was no turning back at that point. So the third book, Below the Radar, came out, and at this point, I can't stop myself. I'm one of those people that have to write every day or I lose my mind. That, or I would end up in the insane asylum, because I was telling my friend Colleen on the way here that the characters started talking to me and changed my whole ending of this fourth book I'm writing. And I said, you know, if I wasn't an author, I'd be crazy because these characters talk to me and I literally talk back to them. So I have to keep writing or they might lock me up one day. So with Beyond the Cabin, that's I guess what we're here for. The characters in Beyond the Cabin, you probably noticed that if you've read the first book, Beyond the Cabin, got a little bit more exciting, a little bit more violent probably. The books I think have progressed a little bit more with the violence and things like that. If anybody's sensitive, I'm sorry about the language. I try to limit the language, but I also try to keep it as realistic as I can. And unfortunately, bad guys cuss and cops probably cuss worse. So I've had little old ladies wag their fingers at me and yell at me because of my language, and I apologize and move on. But that's just the deal. But I loved writing this book. This was my favorite of all three. And I know you're not supposed to say that because it's like picking a favorite child, but it was the fastest book for me. When I finished Behind the Mask, I sat down to write Beyond the Cabin, and 18 months later, the book was born. I mean, it was fast and furious. I wrote every day and it just poured onto the pages and I couldn't stop. So it was the easiest of the three to write. And everybody, I get the question a lot, well, what's your writing style? My writing style is I'll write, I'll put it away, the next day I'll go back, I'll read what I wrote the day before, do a little bit of editing and then move on. That's always been my writing style for the first two books, and it worked for me. I changed my writing style for the third book, and it was a huge disaster, and I won't do that again. I had decided to do I don't know if anybody writes here, but Anno month, where the month of November, where you write 50,000 words in a month. I thought, this sounds like fun, I should do this. And so I did it. I sat down and I made 50,000 words in a month. And they were 50,000 of some of the worst words I ever put on paper. And my husband my first round editor was reading it and he said, "This is terrible." I mean, he doesn't sugarcoat anything, but he told me, he says, "I'm reading this and I can absolutely tell you're looking for a word count. You're just writing words to see how much you can get off." And he said, "It doesn't work." And I had so many holes in that third book, and it took me so long going back to fix it. I had characters that disappeared. I mean, gone. They were the first third of the book, they were there, and then the last third, they disappeared. They were just gone. And it was because I was just writing in a frenzy. And I learned a valuable lesson. If something's not broke, don't fix it, you know? And so I went back to my style of writing and then stopping, revising, going through. And to me, when I get finished with a book, when I write in that manner, it's much cleaner at the end, and it's almost ready for first round of edits by the time I get through, because I've read it so many daggone times. But so let's see. Who has questions about Beyond the Cat? If not, I'll just keep on rambling all night.
Anybody have questions?
Because I will.
Or people in Zoom?
Okay, I don't know. So I'll just talk a little bit about the undercover work. How about that? I went into the books. And then as the questions pop up. I did work in the undercover program for 13 years. I was an FBI agent for almost 21 years. And out of the 21 years, I spent 13 years in the undercover unit. I made it to the undercover unit for a couple of reasons. One, my supervisor took one look at me and laughed and said, "You don't look like an FBI agent. We need to get you in the undercover unit." Second, they had an extremist case where they needed some sucker to go to California to be a vegan, live in a commune and be a hippie. And they said, "That's a perfect role for you." So that's how I ended up in California working the extremists. And he even said, I mean, and then when you work undercover, you're backstopped, which means you're given alias identification, passports, driver's license, credit cards, everything. You become this new person. So I got my set of credentials and I started looking at them and I'm like, "You have me 10 years younger than what I'm actually am." And they said, "Yeah, this is a younger set of people and targets. And we thought you could blend in better if you're younger." I'm like, "Well, just because you put it on paper doesn't mean that that's going to happen. You know, I mean, 10 years is a big gap." And you kind of think, well, 10 years, you can just wing it. But just think about that. You know, you relate to things that you did in high school and music and things like that. Well, I graduated high school in '84 in my real life. I graduated in '94 in my undercover life. I had to go back and see what all the bands were, what was popular, because I was in law school. I didn't have time for music and for pop culture and for icons and stuff like that. I mean, those years kind of were gone to me. They were just, my head was in a book during those years. So I had to go back and look and see, okay, well, what was popular? What band was popular? And then the first time I went undercover, the supervisor came to me and said, "Look, we got a little bit of a problem. These are young kids. We did a trash pull, and the majority of the stuff that came out of their trash are drugs and condoms. And we don't want you sleeping with all the targets, and we also can't have you use a lot of drugs, so how are we going to get around this?" So I did some research and said, well, since you got me 10 years younger, I'm going to go in straight edge. And I did the X's and learned the culture, which meant I had to learn all that punk rock music, the straight edge music. Tell you, that stuff will give you a headache. But that was my background. I was a straight edge, which means, you know, no really promiscuous sex, nothing that altered your mind, which meant no alcohol, no drugs and stuff like that. It also means no caffeine. I'm a huge coffee fan. Everybody in here knows how much I love my coffee. Okay, so I meant no caffeine if you were a true straight edge. And, you know, I was living this life 24/7. So, you know, I couldn't sneak off to Starbucks. There was no way that was going to work. So I was immersed in this culture 24/7. And I will say that when you do that, it has a price. Everything comes with a price. And that was one of the other reasons why I wanted to write the books, to show the psychological stress that it has on an agent. But I kind of have a different story too. When you go into the undercover program as an FBI agent, they give you a whole vast bunch of tests, you know, the MMPR and all those psychological tests. They want to make sure you're not crazy. And you'll end up crazy probably at the end, but they want to make sure you're not crazy at the start. So I got called to the DC area to go through all the tests and talk to the counselors and to make sure I wasn't bonkers before they put me into this undercover unit. Well, at the time I was working in St. Croix, and everybody thinks, ooh, St. Croix, you're living on the beach. And St. Croix was a hardship duty post. It was a duty hardship for a reason. Per capita, we had more murders down there than Detroit and Baltimore and places like that. It was a horrible place to work. I saw more dead bodies in that 7 years that I spent in St. Croix than I did the whole rest of my career. One of the things that I always said was, I still shut my eyes and see blood coming out of the bottom of the car, because I saw that so many times, just coming out of the bottom of the car, and that was an image I could never get out of my head. So of course I went up to take their test, and when I were done, all the counselors came in and they looked like they were going to a funeral. And I was like, whoa, what's going on here? And they're like, well, we need to talk about what's going on with you. And I was like, I don't know, what do you mean? They said, well, you're testing off the charge for PTSD, and we can't put an agent who's damaged undercover, you know? And I said, well, nobody wants to do this case, and we're up and running in a couple of days. What are you gonna do? And they said, well, we can't send you undercover. And I said, well, the problem is the island, it seems like to me, working undercover seems like a great solution. So they didn't want to do it. But I will tell you, in all government, when somebody at the very, very top wants something to happen, it happens. So this thing got high enough up to the director's office that they said, no, you're sending that agent, she's going. So, you know, they'd already spent a lot of money. They spent a lot of money getting this thing up and running, and they had a lot of money invested in me, so I went. So 6 months later, I go back and have all the psychologicals, and they come back and they said, we've never seen this before in our life. You are completely normal. And so we have never seen an undercover agent normalize while being undercover. This is the weirdest thing we've ever seen. And I said, well, it sounds pretty good. Yeah. Right? And so they kept their eyes on me for several reasons. One was because of my background and because of what I'd gone through on the island. But two, I also tested off the charts in other ways. I tested very high for empathy. That is not what you want in an undercover agent. So they're like, this is not good. You know, you're going to end up going south. You're going to be, you know, running around with bad guys. And I said, well, you know, it is what it is. I can't change my personality. And they said, you also tested very high as an introvert. Also, not a good quality for an undercover agent. So to the FBI benefit or fault, I'm not sure which, they sent an introverted, very empathetic PTSD agent undercover. And it worked out great. It worked out great. So I went up there not knowing how long I would be gone for my first undercover mission. And I came back 4 years later. So I was actually pretty good at it. And I had found my calling. And I found my niche. That's the thing with the Bureau. Everybody has, you work your way around in this big organization until you find what you love or what you're good at, what you're passionate about. And when I joined the FBI, I wanted to chase serial killers. I was going to be the next John Douglas. That didn't quite work out. But I did end up going down the path of a lot of great undercover agents. The Donnie Brascows of the world, which is Joe Pistow, and some of those people like that would show up for our trainings and our undercover schools, which was pretty cool. So, you know, it's kind of cool to be trained by somebody that was like, you know, a made man in mafia. And although my cases, I don't think ever amounted to that level. But, you know, over the years, we did do quite a bit of serious stuff. You know, the extremist stuff I felt pretty comfortable with. But people always say, well, what was the scariest you've ever been? And it wasn't doing the long-term stuff, it was doing the quick hits. You know, when they'd say, go in and buy a kilo of Coke, you know, that's when it's gonna go bad. That's when everybody in the room has a gun but you. So that's when I was the most scared. And actually the most scared I probably was when I was dealing with cops, you know, dirty cops. Because those are the people that have nothing to lose. And those are the people that will hurt you in a heartbeat. I didn't have as much trouble dealing with the street guys and the gangs and things like that because they're businessmen. They're there to make a profit. But when you have a dirty cop and you're going in and when it goes down, they have nothing to lose. Their whole life is about to go down the toilet. So that was when the hair on the back of the neck and going, this is gonna go. But I did undercover work all the way up until about 6 months before I retired. And I was about 6 months before I retired, we had transferred, and we transferred because case went bad. We were out in California, and I was living this great life in California, a total California girl, loving life, and case went bad, not because of our fault, but our identities were disclosed. And so the Bureau transferred us to the other coast, and here we ended up in Orlando, Florida. So could, they came to you and they tease you. They said, where would you like to go? And I said, Columbia, South Carolina, anywhere in South Carolina. They came back and said, well, we can't get you to South Carolina, we can get you to North Carolina. So I'll take it anywhere in North Carolina, that's great. The next thing they came back and said, well, yeah, we couldn't get you there either. I'm like, where can you get? Well, we can get you to Richmond, we can get you to Newark, we can get you, all these like, and then somebody said Tampa. I said, ooh, Tampa, Florida, I'll take that. So, well, Tampa ended up the Orlando RA. So, but that's how Bill and I ended up in. And that's another kind of funny story. The last undercover case that I worked that was long term, I was called, I was down in Virgin Islands still, and I was called and they said, can you come back to California? And I just started dating my boyfriend at the time. And I had never the bureau. And I was dating this guy, and I hadn't dated anybody in a long time. And it was getting pretty serious. So I said, you know what? No, I'm not coming back to California. I'm happy down here. I'm going to stay down here. So they said, come to California and consult. We need somebody to help us with this case. So I came out there, and I noticed the case said 2 undercover agents. So I said, who's your second undercover? And they said, we haven't picked anybody yet. So I said, I went back to the Virgin Islands and said, hey, Bill, how would you feel about transferring to California, being a vegan and working undercover with me? And I thought he was going to tell me to pound sand, and he just laughed and said, it sounds like a great time, let's do it. So I pitched it to the FBI that my boyfriend and I need to play this couple. And the case agent was like, this is a great idea. The supervisor was like, this is a crazy idea. It's like, kill each other. It's like you're talking about sending a romantically involved couple in to a situation where you're going to work 24/7 together under extreme pressure. No. And I said, well, that's the only way I'll do it. So they made me sign a contract that said if our relationship ended, it was not the fault of the FBI. And I would stay and work the case, and poor Bill could be transferred anywhere they needed to. So he was really rolling the dice on this relationship, let me tell you, because if it didn't work out with him, he could have ended up in Newark. Really easily. So it did work out, and we got along great, and we were each other's backups, and our relationship just grew and grew and grew. And when we were done, we said, hey, 24/7 as undercovers was a cakewalk, let's just get married. So we did. And we are happily married to this day. But I'm not sure, without those years of working that undercover, I mean, I'm not sure, we have such an unusual relationship. I mean, we really can spend 24/7 with each other without driving each other nuts. And if you've ever had a spouse and then had a spouse retire and then suddenly they're under your feet, you kind of know that that's not so easy sometimes, But we were used to it. So, when we retired, it was just like, hey, this is just like undercover work again. We're together 24/7, So that was kind of fun. But I loved my undercover years. It was probably the highlight of my career working as an agent. The other probably highlight, it sounds weird to say, but it was after 9/11 when I did go to New York for the World Trade Center bombing. And I just cannot believe it's been 20 years. We're almost at the 20-year anniversary. It seems like yesterday in a lot of ways. And then it seems like a lifetime in others. But to be there on the ground, doing the work of the Bureau, that's something that's probably always going to stay with me as well. But by far the undercover work, I didn't miss chasing the serial killers, although John Douglas is still a hero of mine. And he sends me his books, every new book that comes out, signed. He actually sent me an 8x10 color picture. That was kind of it's on my Facebook page. I hope you didn't hear that. I love you, John. If you did. I probably just screwed Okay, so now I am gonna shut up and I'm gonna open the floor up to questions. There has to be some questions. Come on, people.
So I want to ask, in Beyond the Cabin, the agent is pretty severely beat up.
Yes.
And so have you had that experience?
I have not been beat up. I've been in the tussle a few times. And of course, you can probably tell I'm not real big. So I usually end up on the bottom of the pile, you know, when it did happen. But I have been in tussles, I've been in fights, I've had prisoners decide they didn't want to go to jail. And kind of one of the funny things was I had a guy that did not want to go to jail and I had him handcuffed on the hood of the car. And he was fighting me and fighting me and fighting me. And I pushed him down on the hood, was trying to keep him down and he just decided he wanted to fight. He decided to give up just as I decided to push him. And he slammed his nose on the front and broke his nose. And so when they came and asked the guy, they said, well, what's going on? He turns around and he finds the biggest guy there. And he says, that guy punched me in the nose. And then they're like, what happened? He goes, nothing happened. He would not tell them that the 5'2" woman just broke his nose. And so I kept asking, I said, do I need to report this? And it's like, he doesn't seem to want to talk about it. And so I was like, all right. It never came back to haunt me. I kind of thought it might, but no, he went to jail that night with his bloody nose and never told anybody that I broke his nose. So. But I have been in a few fights. I studied martial arts for close to 20 years just to kind of make up for the size problem because, you know, it doesn't matter how good of a fighter you are, size matters when you're in a fight, it really does. So I studied martial arts just to kind of give myself a little bit of an advantage. Of course, when I went to the FBI Academy, I did not tell them I knew the martial arts. I just kept my mouth shut and lay low in tall weeds. That was always my philosophy to get through it. So, but yeah, poor Lexie got the crap beat out of her in Beyond the Cabin. And I actually just reread it because I hadn't read it since I wrote it. So I reread it. I got to a couple of scenes. The one like the bunny where she bites you down to the bone. I was like, what was I thinking? I was like, I was in an aggressive mood when I wrote some of those fight scenes. But yeah, so luckily I was never beat up like that. I did have some friends that were pretty beat up in fights and things like that. I've had some undercover friends that came very close to dying. And I have had friends killed in the line of duty. So you know, you can't be in law enforcement for 21 years and not deal with some of the hardships and the heartaches that go along with being in law enforcement. Any other questions?
So how much research is put in when, as I'm reading the book again, where you're talking about the rivers in the area and different restaurants or stores that are familiar to the area you're talking?
Well, when I was writing the book, I was actually living right in the Pawleys Island area. It was living in Rose Inlet. So it was still, I was writing about what I was living where what I was writing about. So everything in it is actually, all the restaurants are actually there, with the exception of one that had changed. There was a restaurant I put in the very first book. It used to be in the hammock shops. Colleen, you might have to help me with this one. What was it was in the first book and I can't remember.
Roses?
The lady that had the restaurant in the hammock shops originally, and then she closed. Roz.
Rice Mill Cafe.
So I put Roz's Rice Mill Cafe in the first book. And then I was so excited, I go to Roz's and it was gone. Are you kidding me? So then I find out Roz moved to Georgetown and she had an attic. So I put and I go to Georgetown, and damn if she didn't close that restaurant too. I was like, Roz is not making it anymore in my books. But most of the stuff, the research came literally from working for Captain Sandy and being on those waterways and dealing with tourists and dealing with tours and just listening to his tours.
Yeah, I think that's what made the book so fun, is it was so familiar.
And it was so personal to me. I asked Sandy one time, because he seemed to know the answer to everything. And he said, how do you know all this? He says, girl, They're asking the question. They don't know the answer. I just make it up. I never know if he told me the truth, if he really was just making it up or not. He was so funny. I mean, we took a group in the wintertime out bird watching. And they would be on one side of the boat and they had their binoculars and their notepads and and then they'd run to the other side. And so Sandy was standing there and he goes, there's an IBB. And so they all run and they're all looking and they're trying to find it. And I leaned over, I said, what's an IBB? And he goes, itty bitty bird. I said, Sandy, you're awful. He goes, oh, that'll keep them busy for half hour. They're like, what? But yeah, no, he was a hoot, but he was also a lot like the Captain E character that you never knew. I mean, there was a little seedy side too that you kind of always wonder, you know, did he do everything on the up and up? And, you know, there might have been a few years of some drug running. I mean, put it this way, he knew Jimmy Buffett back in the days when Jimmy ran a lot of grass. So I think they had run a little bit of marijuana back in the day. I didn't ask too many questions, but I did inherit a bird from him, a parakeet, a bronze parakeet that's in my living room now that is supposed to be something that Jimmy Buffett did and the captain had given it to him when he died. But yeah, there's a lot that went on, I think, in those days. Any questions?
I have one. Dana, I don't know if you can see the people that are Zooming, but anyway, this is Ann. I haven't met you. Actually, I haven't met any of you, and I'm looking forward to that next month. I'm actually in New York, but I'm coming down for an extended time. But I just was curious, are you like the character of Lexie? How are you like her? Are you more like her or are you more unlike her? I'm just curious.
That's a great question. The character of Lexie came straight out of my journals. I kept a journal when I worked undercover, and I actually kept it hidden in the ceiling panels of my undercover apartment. But I wrote down the thoughts, emotions, and feelings. And when I first started writing the first book, Lexie came straight out of the novel. I mean, right out of the journals. So Lexie is just a side of me. I mean, she and I are very much alike. Lexie likes coffee. I like coffee. Lexie's a huge Broadway fan. Somebody standing here is a huge Broadway fan. So I gave Lexie a lot of my characteristics, I guess. And I know people that know me really well laugh and say, when I read your books, I hear your voice. Mm-hmm. So yes, so Lexie is a lot like me, and yeah, warts and all, I guess. I will say something about the second book. In the first book, Lexie had a fantastic contact agent, Kate Summers, actually, and Kate shows back up in the third book as well as her contact agent. And in the second book, things went wrong because Lexie did not have a good contact agent. And people, that's usually what this book is. Did that really happen? Did you have a bad contact agent? I will say, in all the years I worked undercover, I had excellent contact agents, because your contact agent is your tether to reality. That is the one person that has your back. It can't be the case agent, because the case agent is too tied up in the case and wants the case to go a certain way. Your contact agent's sole responsibility is that undercover. Is the undercover stable? Is the undercover going off the rails? Is the undercover safe? Is the undercover taking too many chances? So if you don't have a good contact agent, you're really dangling yourself out there. And so what I was thinking when I was wrote the second book is, what if I didn't have that? What if I didn't have, what if Lexie didn't have Kate, and what if I didn't have Vicky? I had my contact agent, which is Kate in the book, is the compilation of 3 contact agents I had over the years. The funny thing is 2 were men and 1 was a woman. So everybody's like, well, why did she get to be a woman when 2 of them were men? And I was like, well, she was last on the list. And I like the idea of having the women too, and the dynamic with the 2 women. But my contact agent comes to he lives in North Carolina now, and he comes to all my book events when I launch a new book. And so he and his wife are always sitting in the front row, which is pretty cool, because I look at him and I know that man had my life in his hands. And he was always there. He answered on the first ring. If I called him at 3 o'clock in the morning, Bruce had the phone in his hand. And if you don't have that person, then you don't need to be working undercover because something bad is going to happen. So that was what I kept thinking, what if Lexie didn't have that? And that's where Beyond the Cabin happened, and she took too many chances. And then I also get people say, well, you probably would never really take a chance like that. You probably never really rent a boat and go do surveillance by yourself. And I'm just like, oh yeah, it's always better to ask forgiveness and permission. And I did a lot of stupid things in 21 years that I look back now and I think, good God, how did I not get killed? But I worked surveillance by myself many times, you know, out corners at night, hiding in the bush, binoculars, you know, the whole thing. If you didn't have enough people to do surveillance, then you just kind of did what you had to do. So it's kind of funny because the women always think, oh, well, you would never do that. Anybody that was in the military is all like, oh yeah, you do it. You do what you have to do. So it's just one of those things that you do. But yeah, and answer your question, Lexie is a lot like me.
So I'm thinking FBI is reading your things and they're thinking, oh yeah, we're checking all the ceilings from now on of those agents.
Well, the FBI has to pre-approve all the books before they're published too. So I have to send them my manuscripts and they go through them and check to make sure I'm not giving away any trade secrets. And then they'll give me the letter to say you can publish. I've been really lucky though, like with Behind the Mask, there was one sentence they wanted removed. Out of 400 pages, one sentence, I said, I'll take it, you know. The second book, I got in a little bit of trouble because my idiot friends that were still working, I worked with male FBI agents. I know it's probably hard for you guys to think that male FBI agents are like, you know, have big egos. Believe me, they do. And I had a couple of buddies that was on my squad that said, hey, put me in your next book and make me hot, you know. Like an idiot, I do it. I do it. I said, okay, sure, I'll put you in my book and make you hot. The FBI started calling and said, okay, we've got a Stuart Woods, first one was Stuart Woods in this book. And they said, there's an agent named Stuart Woods. And I just don't know why, it just clicked. I said, there's an author named Stuart Woods. Did you know that? And then he lost track of what he was saying and he went on to something else. So I was like, okay, I'm keeping that one. Yeah, but Matt Oliver was the other one too. Matt, he was my partner in Orlando, my last. And he was just like the character. He was Hispanic and machismo. And I thought, yeah, okay. But yeah, the FBI they wanted that changed. I told them I would. I didn't. So. They haven't taken my pension away yet. I thought it was kind of silly, so I didn't change it. But nobody checked up on it. And the third one, I'm trying to think, they didn't have any changes in the third one, which surprised me. Because to me, the third one, I thought, treaded close to trade secret more than the first two. Because of traveling overseas and the stuff that was going on overseas. I really thought I was going to get hammered. But then I think I just got a lazy agent that probably didn't even care about reading it because I got the little stamped letter that said you're good to go, publish away. It was like, okay. So I don't ask any questions. Actually, it's probably a good thing because I think it was already printed. Better to ask forgiveness and permission.
Do FBI agents retired kind of get together periodically, or you still have a lot of friends and buddies in the field? I do have quite a few friends still in the field, mainly because when I ended up, I was on a pretty young squad. I was on gangs and drugs at the end, and so most of those guys were young. They called me grandma. I couldn't see the tags anymore, so I always had to ride shotgun with somebody, you know, kept the log, and they thought that kind of stuff was funny. But I was also mentoring a couple of them that were becoming undercover agents too, so they couldn't give me too hard of a time. But I did have quite a few friends that are still in the bureau. My last year, I went back to the academy as a counselor, and I took kids, well, I say kids, but you know, they're agents through from day one until the day they graduated. So I did 2 different classes. So it was kind of cool because I got to pass the baton to the next generation. It was the last thing I did before I retired. And I was blown away at how
intelligent and competent and established these people were. I mean, they were all coming from six-figure salaries for the most part to just basically get back to their country and become an FBI agent. I was like, do you know you're not gonna like that? They didn't, you know, some of them came from big tech companies. Most of them spoke multiple languages. We had doctors and nurses. We had people from all these different walks of life that was just like, wow, all because they wanted to, you know, be an FBI agent. So I thought that was pretty cool. But it was really neat. And so I do have quite a few people still in the field that I kind of keep track of. And we actually have a large population of retired agents in this area. We have a retired special agents association that meets in Beaufort and Bluffton and Hilton Head. We kind of move around. We have a big group. I was really surprised how many we had. Good area to retire in, I guess.
Dana, did you keep the journal because you thought you were going to write about the experiences afterwards? At what point did you decide you were going to be a writer and tell these stories?
I didn't keep them because I thought I was going to write. I kept them to keep myself sane. It was I fought with management, and I know it's pretty obvious in the first book. I fought with management a lot. In fact, my editor toned it down a lot. My editor said I had an agenda, and it was an anti-management, and he was right. So what I did was I would get that journal out and I would just vent. I didn't have anybody. When I worked at first Undercover, I was completely by myself. My contact agent, Bruce, actually was too well known in the animal rights world and the Earth Liberation Front. So when I did meet him, I had to meet him like an hour and a half out of town. And so I had nobody. I didn't have anybody I could just go sit and talk to. The only people in my life were targets. The only people I hung out with were bad guys. So I got the journal to vent. And I just vented and vented, because you got to remember, nobody had my phone number. My mom couldn't contact me. My dad couldn't contact me. Nobody could use nobody had my undercover information. They weren't allowed to. So I had nobody to talk to. So I used them as a source of psychological, you know, free the mind. I vented in them. And then when I got them back, it was actually during the last move when we were being transferred, because of the situation that we'd been burned. We weren't allowed to go to the FBI office. We weren't allowed to go back to our undercover apartment. We weren't allowed to go to any of the covert locations because of our identities had been disclosed. So it's like, well, where the heck are we going to go? So we were stuck in a tiny little apartment by ourselves with nothing to do. And I had all the journals. So I started flipping through them. And at first it was kind of funny because I was like, man, I was really angry that night. And I started laughing. And then I looked at Bill and I said, there's a novel here. And he goes, a novel? I said, yeah, I'm going to write a book for my mom, because my mom is a huge reader. And I said, I'm going to write a book for my mom. She's always wanted me to write. I've always refused to write. I'm going to write this book for my mom. And that's how Behind the Mask started. It was never intended to be a life-changing career or anything like that. It was supposed to be a book for my mom. And then when I guess the editor, first time an editor looked at it, they said, no, this isn't for your mom. This is for the world. We're going to get this out there. And I was like, and then they said, how many more of these do you got in you? And I said, 21 years worth. I said, I got a lot of stories. I said, this is just the undercover world. You know, I've got all these years where I was an overt drug agent and worked in the Caribbean and all the crazy stuff that we did down there that people, I'm hesitant to write about that because it's so crazy, some of the stuff that was going on, that people won't believe it. I mean, it's so far out of the realm of possibilities that people will think, wow, she's lost her noodles. This stuff couldn't have happened. But yeah, those 7 years on the Virgin Islands were the craziest years of my life. Some of the stuff that happened, I still look back, and I've got a buddy that we talk every once in a while, because he was nearly killed. He actually was shot twice through his vest with an AK-47. So his vest was pierced. His arm was like ripped off. And so we're very close. But we talk a lot, and we talk about those years. And I think for him, it's a way of getting some of it out. And he remembers stuff that I have like definitely tried to put out of my mind, and then he brings it to the forefront. And I was like, I don't know that talking to you is a good thing. But yeah, so I would like to write a book about the years in the Caribbean, but I just don't know that I ever could, because it would be so far-fetched and crazy. And the dialect would be difficult, I think, for me to write and be easy enough to read. I really have trouble writing the dialect, I think.
Can you tell us about what project you're working on now?
Oh, I'd love to. I'm writing the ending of my 4th book right now as we speak. And it's I'm leaving the world of thrillers for a while. It's more of a women's fiction / adventure book. And it's basically a book that I've always kind of had in my head that I wanted to write, and I decided to write it after the 3rd book. I thought I've got the 3 books done. I'm writing a book that's been in my head for a while. But it's about a group of friends that have been friends since they were in junior high school. They're all at that age of early 50s now, and they were brought back together because of a tragedy. And because of the tragedy, the one decides she's gonna go off half-cocked and she's going to hike the Appalachian Trail. The other 4 decide she can't do that by herself, so they start on this big adventure, supposedly to help her heal, but what they do is they find out that they all need a little bit of healing, and that just because they were friends when they were young, they don't necessarily know each other now. They've all lived these complete lifetimes between those high school days and, you know, by the time you're in the 50s, and they're all dealing with different things, you know, love, loss, betrayal, empty nest, a little bit of everything. So it's been a lot of fun to write. I crack myself up. Bill says it's because he thinks that I think I'm a lot funnier than I am. So I don't know if it's that funny or if I just think it's that funny, but I hope it's as funny as I think it is. But it also has some pretty hairy stuff going on too, you know, and some action and some adventure along the way. But I hope everybody likes it. But it feels weird leaving the FBI realm behind for a while, but I was telling my friend Colleen here that yesterday when I was writing, I kept substituting the main character's name for Lexie, and I had to go back and do the search find. So Lexie is trying to get back on the pages. So without a doubt, I think Lexie, we haven't seen the end of Lexie. Lexie will be back. I like her. I just kind of attached to her. I get really attached to my characters. There's a question.
Maybe this question.
Yeah, I have a question. I've read all 3 of the Lexie books, and all the way through all of them, I'm getting all the visuals so well. I can just see what's going on in my head. And I can also see it on film, on the screen. So I'm wondering, is that going anywhere?
Well, I have done 2 screenplays. One is an original screenplay that is, started out, it was going to be based on the characters in the Lexie book. It turned out that by the time we were all finished with it, it didn't even resemble the book anymore. So it has become a 3-season television proposal, which is an original screenplay. I also have a screenplay out there now that is based on the 3rd book, based on Below the Radar. It is very much like the book, except for we took some different licensing with it. I really like it. We brought it into kind of a little bit more modern terms. We made a few of the characters a little more diverse, and it's been a lot of fun to write. And we also, in the 3rd book, if you remember, the main bad guy was a male. In the screenplay, we made that a female character. So it's very much a cat and mouse, a killing Eve situation. And I love it. It's really fun. And she is way worse than the bad guy from the book. So by the time we got finished with her, she's evil, she's mad. But she was so much fun to write. But in answer to the question, we had taken a few meetings with some production companies. And it's one of those things where everybody's really hot and heavy about it, and then you hear crickets. So the last meeting we took was a few weeks ago. They wanted the pilot. They were excited about it, but they now have the pilot and we haven't heard anything yet. They have said, though, not to expect anything right away. They wanted to see where they could maybe fit it in or sell it. And we've had other meetings with production companies where they'll tell you, there's too many FBI things on TV. This isn't what we're looking for, which is fine. You know, I would rather know than not know. But it is in the works. surprisingly, the screenplay with the original screenplay is the one that's getting the most attention right now. And that's a screenplay that I wrote like 3 years ago. I mean, I thought it was dead in the water. I didn't even give it another thought until I got the phone call that said, is this available and does anybody have rights to it? And I was like, you want them? So,
In your mind, who would play Lexie?
see, that's a hard thing. You know, when I first wrote the very first book, I thought of Lexie, Reese Witherspoon was in my head. The way she looked, mainly because she's short and blonde and, you know, I don't know, there's got a little similarity thing going. I really pictured Reese. Well, Reese is way too old to play Lexie now. And young character, I mean, these young actors now are, I mean, they're so different. I really like the Elizabeth Olsen. She did an FBI movie not too long ago, Win Something, where she did the thing on the reservation. I thought, damn, she nailed the FBI character. I thought she'd make a good Lexie. But yeah, I mean, it would have to be an actress, late 20s, because she's in her late 20s in the first book, late 20s, early 30s. And you know, somebody had said, what about Jennifer, the girl from Hunger Games? I was like, she's a little tall, but you know, and I said, if you can get her, that's fine, because she's like magic and she will all be rich. But so I don't know, you know, there's just so many of those young actresses out there. I also like the young actress that was in I can't remember, Veronica Roth's books, young adult books.
Divergence.
Yes, Divergence.
Yes, sure.
Woodley,
Yeah.
Shonda Woodley. I like that girl.
Mhm.
I'm like, get her. So I don't know, you know, it'd be fun. It'd be really fun to pick characters and we did that a little bit. We kind of thought who would play Adam, who would play Lexie, and ultimately it's going to be in the hands of the production company and who they want, no matter who we said. And I did learn something very important when writing screenplays, because when you're writing the novel, you put so much detail in there. You want them to know that your character is 5'2" and blonde and this and this. When you're doing the screenplay, they may have an actor in their mind, and you give them the age, and that's about it. You know, you might give them that they're athletically built or something like that. But I learned quickly, you don't give them a lot of description, because if the director or the producer or somebody in charge has an actor that they think is for this part, you want them to say, yeah, that actor would be perfect for that part. So you don't put a lot of detail. That was hard for me. I would go along and put all this detail. My screenwriting partner would come take it all out. And also, you know, I'm used to writing 400-page books. And to write an episode of television, it's basically a minute a page. So to try to get, you know, an episode down to like 60 minutes was really difficult for me, and also because in the book you can tell so much as far as, you know, you're showing the emotions and all the stuff that's going on in the characters' heads, and you can't do that in a screenplay. And that was a little difficult at first too. But
So how did you learn how to write a screenplay?
I winged it.
Is that how you learned how to write a novel?
That's how I learned how to write a novel too. I winged it. I winged everything. No, I went to a writers' conference, Southeastern Writers, down in Georgia, and we had a screenplay writer that was teaching a class. And I sat in on his class several times, and he taught like 4 hours, and I really liked him. He was kind of interesting. And the next thing I know, he was like, hey, let's go grab a beer. And my sister's going with us, you know, I guess he wouldn't know, he wasn't gonna attack me or something. So he and I and his sister sat down and had drinks, and he got up to go to the bathroom, and his sister leans over and says, you know, this is a job audition, right? And I said, no, why? She said, Michael likes your books. He thinks they will make a great television show or movie, but authors are notoriously hard to work with. They get protective of their characters, they're a pain in the butt, and he's feeling you out. He wants to see how easy you are to get along with. So, you know, after a couple of lines, I'm really easy. And Michael found that out, and we kind of clicked. The only problem was Michael had come from Hollywood, and his background was big movies, like blockbuster movies. So, you know, he had to have something blowing up on every page. And I was just like, And he also, my big problem with it, and we laugh about it now, but it's still in the screenplay, was the opening scene, things are blowing up and there's a sultry blonde having sex by the firelight with this rugged renegade. And then I find out 2 pages later, it's Lexie. And I was like, no. 3 books the girl hasn't had sex. You can't have her having sex in the opening before the credits go. He's like, hey, this is television, sex sells. So I kind of learned my lesson that time. And with the one that I just did with my new partner, that's based on the book, I said, okay, we're gonna have some ground rules here. Lexie's not gonna have sex in the opening. And we kept it very, very close to the book. And that was her hope too, because she wanted to write something that was more true to the FBI. And she said, the reason I want to do the screenplay is I like the book and I don't want to change the book. I just want to bring the book to television. So, but it's not an easy process to make that transition. And people ask me, would you do it again? I'm like, yeah, probably not. Now, if somebody offers me a job writing for television, of course I'm going to go and do it. I'm not stupid, but will I voluntarily put myself out there and write another screenplay? Probably not. It was more difficult than I thought.
I have a question. So in the real life of an FBI agent, there's probably not a lot of sex going on. So when you're writing a novel, is it hard for you to write the romantic part? Because you had this hot guy going, and then damn, he was dead. And I told my husband, I said, the hot guy's dead.
That was the hardest, that was the saddest part of the book.
I know, I was like, actually, well, you got them dead. I mean, that's evil.
Well, yeah, I can write the bad guy.
Oh, yeah.
If you guys didn't hear that, she'd asked me if writing the romantic parts and the sex parts was hard. And I actually kind of have a funny story, and I can't believe I'm actually going to tell this story on myself.
On tape.
Yes, I know. Bill usually tells this on me, but when I wrote Behind the Mask, it had quite a few scenes in it. And I don't know why, but it had really steamy sex scenes all through this book. And he's my first round editor, and he was reading it. He goes, why? Why? He said, why do you have this? I said, I don't know. I can't believe I'm telling this, but I just read 50 Shades of Grey. It's out there. I just read that stupid book. I guess that crap was in my mind, and I thought, okay, it needs it. So he says, you got to cut this crap out. So of course, I don't believe he's not a real editor, right? I'm like, he's not a real editor, so I send it to the editor like that. Oh my, I get a phone call. I don't even get an email. I get a phone call from the editor, and the editor's like, I don't even know where to start. He said, you're not writing erotica. He said, I'm gonna start with that. All of the sex scenes have to go. Cut them, delete, don't look back, delete. He says, I'm not even gonna venture to try to fix them, they're bad. So he says, come out of there. And he told me, I remember he said, it's much better for the audience to use their imagination. Make it romantic, make it sweet. He says, we don't want to hear about somebody grabbing something and he's like, this is bad. And he says, let me give you a word of advice. You don't ever need to write erotica. You're bad at it. So Bill was right. And if you're listening, Bill, you were right. They all went. But yeah, no, I found out quickly. I had to take all that out. And I am not a romance writer. I can't write romance. I will never write romance. I wish I could, because romance sells. And romance readers will buy a ton of books, but I can't write romance. So, but now I know I embarrassed myself pretty good with that first book. Yeah, I'm glad that's not my editor anymore.
Any other questions?
I still can't believe I just admitted that I read 50 Shades of Grey. I just read them all. But
Wrap?
yeah.
Anything else?
Any other questions from the peanut gallery out there?
So let's stop recording, and then I would like to talk about September.
I'll relinquish the mic.